Everyone, welcome. We'll give it a couple minute or so for everyone to join in. Go ahead and get started. I know it's going to be probably a long session today, so we can go ahead. But hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today to talk about loan repayment strategies with our office, the Office of Student Financial Services. And we're here with Anne today from the AAMC. My name is Stephanie Reynolds. I'm also on the call along with my colleague Meredith Kelly, who you might have worked with as well. But we're representing Student Financial Services. And before I pass it on to Anne, I just wanted to wish you all a huge congratulations on your upcoming graduation. We're so excited for you, and we look forward to your continued success in the medical field. So as a reminder, we do want to let you know that you make sure you complete your exit counseling requirements. If for any federal loans, you need to complete your exit counseling online on studentaid.gov. We've also emailed any students that are borrowing institutional loan fundings that they need to complete their exit counseling online with Heartland ECSI. So you should have got an email to get that completed as well. So make sure you complete those for whatever loan you have. But today we'll focus on repayment on the federal loan strategies and tools to help you with the repayment. And it's also a great time to start thinking about that. Things have been changing rapidly in the federal government. So it's good to be here to get all the most up-to-date information while you're entering repayment right now. So our office is here to help with any questions too on the loan repayment as well. But just for general housekeeping, just stay muted through the presentation. You can submit questions in the chat, and we'll be answering them throughout the presentation and take some time at the end to answer your questions live. As a reminder, we are recording this, so you'll have access to that on our website for a little bit of time. Just if you have any notes, you can take them now, but we're also going to have a recording posted for you as well. But without further ado, I wanted to introduce Anne Yeager from the AAMC. And this presentation is going to be geared towards graduating medical students. We do have a session tonight that's for all BUMC graduate students. That's at 5 o'clock too as well. So thank you again for your time. Congratulations as well. And I'll turn it over to Anne.
Thank you, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this afternoon. As she mentioned, the recording will be available, so I know that's always a question we get right away. And then I will also provide my slides as well. So if you are interested in viewing the slides after the fact as well, I'll send those out once we're finished here today. So again, my name is Anne Yeager. I'm with the AAMC. I've worked in financial aid and kind of counseling students on repaying loans for several years now, mainly medical students. So definitely understand, kind of what you're up against and what you're looking in terms of making decisions and what questions you might have. So happy to, spend some time with you this afternoon, hopefully get you some good information. Despite all the, changes that are happening, we'll try to work through some of that with you. So first, I also want to say congratulations. Obviously, you have a lot going on, huge accomplishments. You've match days now behind you. You're probably focused now on actual graduation and then, of course, starting your residency program. So we're going to talk through, what you can expect as you transition to residency. A lot of the questions that we get generally are like, will I be able to repay my loans while I'm in residency? How do I pick that payment plan? What is public service loan forgiveness? What does that look like? How do I apply for it? We'll talk a little bit about consolidation and refinancing and what the differences in those two terms are so that you understand, if that's an option for you. And then, of course, we'll touch on what's currently going on with the student loan program and what options you do have available to you. If you have questions as we go, feel free to put those in the Q&A box, as Stephanie mentioned. She'll be able to answer some as well as we move. I will try to keep tabs on what's coming in and address them if it's relevant to the topic at hand. And then, of course, we'll circle back to any questions to make sure that we answer all of the questions you have today. So we will talk through the timeline for repayment, where to find your loan information, and then your options. We'll run through a couple different repayment scenarios, and then we'll finish up by talking about budgeting in that loan payment once we know what that amount might look like for you, and then provide you with some additional resources that hopefully you can take with you as you move to the next chapter of your life and your finances. So for the timeline for repayment, we like to talk about, what you can be doing right now. And that mainly is just understanding the type of loans that you do have. If they're all federal loans, if maybe you have some private loans as well, those institutional loans that Stephanie referenced as well, knowing what type of loans you have, who your loan servicer is, and where to find that information. Next, before you graduate, it's important to understand too, if you have any loans, maybe they're from your undergraduate time, or maybe you took a break during medical school where you already have used the grace period on those loans. We'll talk more about a grace period here in a few minutes, but if you have any loans that you borrowed and then took 6 months off of school, whether that's between undergrad and med school or maybe during medical school, you likely have used a grace period on those previous loans. So if that's the case, those loans do enter repayment upon graduation. If you have not used your grace period on your loans, or you came back to school and then took out additional loans, those generally will have a 6-month grace period. So understanding if you do have loans on 2 different timelines is important. And then upon graduation, understanding and just knowing what consolidation means and if that's something you should consider doing, once you graduate, or if you need to do that at all. So we'll talk through what that looks like as well. And then as you begin your residency program, if you are interested in public service loan forgiveness, and you're headed somewhere that qualifies as a public service loan forgiveness employer, you can start submitting those forms once you are employed. We'll talk through that process in more detail as well. And then 90 days before your grace period ends. So as you approach probably November, December, when your first payment will be due, 90 days prior to that time, you'll be able to officially select your repayment plan. So just understanding that's the time frame you'll need to do it. And then once you select that repayment plan, if you choose an income-driven repayment plan, it's based on your income, every 12 months you do have to recertify your income. So you'll get a notification from your loan servicer that says, hey, in 90 days, it's time to renew your income-driven repayment plan. You'll have to submit that information to your servicer each year. So that's kind of the timeline of, right now through the end of your first year of repayment on just kind of some timeline to understand what you need to do and when. When we talk about the grace period, I just kind of want to go back and just make sure we understand the terminology that's being used. Depending on the type of loans you have, the grace period can vary a little bit, but generally it's going to be a 6-month period where payments are not due after you cease enrollment. So that's either you stop attending or you graduated. If you have subsidized loans, which would have been loans that you received as an undergraduate student, those have a 6-month grace period. Any unsubsidized loans, both undergrad or graduate level, those would have 6 months. And then PLUS loans also have a 6-month period where there's no payments due. It's not technically a grace period. It's called a post-enrollment deferment period, but it operates very similar to a grace period. And then if you have Perkins loans, which is it's an older federal loan program that they're no longer issuing new loans, but there may be some students that received a Perkins loan as an undergraduate student. Those will be entering repayment as well. They have a slightly longer grace period at 9 months. Again, just to kind of talk through the terminology, a subsidized loan is a loan where the government has been paying on that interest for you the entire time that you've been in school during your grace period, and then certain periods of time with some of the income-driven plans, it remains subsidized. Some examples of subsidized loans include the direct subsidized loan, Again, that was a loan based on financial needs, so you would have had to qualify for it when you filed your FAFSA as an undergraduate student. Perkins loans are also considered subsidized, and then the LDS and PCL loan programs, again, maybe just a handful of students, if any, have those types of loans. They would not have been a loan you would have received through FAFSA, but they're a different type of federal loan where there's no interest accruing, while you're in school. What's more common for most medical school borrowers are the unsubsidized loans. And those are basically any loan that you've received that interest starts accruing from the moment that money disperses to you or hits your account. So that you've borrowed that loan, and from day one, it's accruing interest. Those include the direct unsub, the direct grad plus, and then any private or alternative loans. If you borrowed money from a private, a bank or a financial institution, those generally accrue interest immediately as well. We, again, will focus on the direct loans, given that for the majority of you, that's probably what your loan portfolio is made up of. Speaking about interest, I just want to kind of touch on interest capitalization and what that means. So sometimes you'll hear, well, my loan interest is compounding or is capitalizing, and what does that really mean? So that means that if you have any unpaid interest that's on a loan, it gets added to your principal balance, and then your interest then starts accruing on that higher principal balance. So interest capitalization can happen at a couple different points. It does happen when a deferment period ends on the when a deferment period ends. So if we look back to the couple slides ago when we talked about the Grad Plus loan doesn't have a grace period, it has a post-enrollment deferment period. So when that deferment period ends, your interest will capitalize on your Grad Plus loans. This does not happen on your unsubsidized loans after your grace period, but it will happen on your Grad Plus loans as you enter repayment after that deferment. It also can happen when you leave the income-based repayment plan. So we'll talk about that more here in a few minutes. But if you leave that income-based repayment plan, or if you fail to recertify your income on that plan, or if you no longer qualify for that plan once you're on it, then any unpaid interest you have on your loans, whether it's Grad Plus or unsub, will capitalize on that specific plan. So just kind of wanted to point out when that happens. It used to be that interest would capitalize on unsubsidized loans as well at multiple different points. So it doesn't happen as nearly often as it used to, which is a good thing. But I did want to point out, the couple times that it can happen. So where to find your loan information and to figure out what type of loans you do have. For the federal loans, all of that information is going to be available to you at studentaid.gov. So that would be anything you applied for when you filled out your FAFSA and you received through your school from the federal government will be listed there. If you have institutional loans, those are loans that are awarded and serviced either by your school or by a third-party servicer. So it sounds like Stephanie had already mentioned that some of you may have those institutional loans. So if you need to find that information, you want to check with your school, whether that be your financial aid office, or maybe, it sounds like you have a servicer she already mentioned that you'll be able to get in contact with. But understanding that that loan is separate from your federal loans, you don't want to lose sight of it because you'll need to make repayment on that one as well. And then if you do have any private loans, so this would be for any students that may have borrowed money from a private bank or financial institution, maybe a credit union, whether you were an undergraduate or during medical school. If you don't have that information or those details, you can usually find that on your credit report because they do report to the credit bureaus, how much you owe. They'll have their contact information. So it's always a good idea. Check your credit report, even if you don't have the private loans, just to make sure that the accounts that are open in your name, you're aware of them. And as you're making this transition to residency, that you're focusing on, managing your finances and making sure everything's organized, but then also which accounts are open. However, if you need to find that private loan information, if you don't have it, you can find that on your credit report. So annualcreditreport.com, you can pull a free copy of your credit report from each of the credit bureaus from that website. This is the current list of loan servicing companies that are contracted with the Department of Education. So if you're looking at this list, one of these may or may not look familiar to you if you already know who your loan servicer is. I like to show this just so that you are aware, if you receive an email or something in the regular mail and it has one of these companies' names on it, you want to make sure you open it, read it, and understand, who is servicing your loan, because that's who you're actually going to make your loan payment to. So it'd be one of these companies. You can find that information on studentaid.gov when you log in to your studentaid.gov account and you click on view account. One of the first things you should see on the right-hand side should be who your loan servicer is with a link to their website, their contact information, where you can then click on that and go and create an account with that servicing company as well. A couple of things we want to point out about studentaid.gov. So once you're in there and you can view your account, you will be able to see the loan details, which includes all of the interest rates on your current loans that you've borrowed. The interest rates listed here are for the past 4 years. Every year, those interest rates did change on July 1st of each year. So depending on the time of year and when your classes began and when you borrowed that money is when that interest rate would have gone into play. These interest rates are fixed for the life of the loan. So for your M1 year, if you have an unsubsidized loan, that 5.28% is going to remain that interest rate until that loan is paid off. It doesn't fluctuate in that regard. The plus loans, as you can see here, the interest rates are slightly higher. They're always 1% higher than the unsubsidized. Again, depending on when you borrowed that money, July 1st is when the rates went into effect for each year. Just important to kind of note as you're going through your information to make sure that you understand, where you stand in terms of how much you borrowed, but also what the interest rates are on those loans. Another feature of studentaid.gov I just wanted to highlight is you can download your aid data. There's a blue button here that says download my aid data. It will download all of your loan details into a text file. So that includes the amount that you owe, the school you attended when you borrowed it, the interest rates, the status of the loans. It'll all into a text file, which then you can use to upload into our, we have a calculator called the Med Loan Organizer and Calculator, and you can simply upload that text file right into our calculator, and it'll allow you to run different scenarios based on some other input you put into the calculator to help you determine what repayment option might be best for you and what repayment options just look like in terms of your residency income and then your after residency income. So highly recommend, if you haven't had a chance to do this yet, to after today, is take some time and run your specific numbers with your specific situation, because it can generally give you a good idea of kind of where to get started in terms of knowing how to decide and how to make that decision on which plan is going to work best for you. Okay, so we have one question here. Is there a benefit to start paying prior to the grace period ends? So, I mean, there's always a benefit to make payments on your loans, obviously, for trying to pay them off quickly, or to take advantage of any opportunity you have to make payments towards your loans. So you don't have to make a payment during a grace period. Generally, the grace period is available for you, so you can kind of navigate this transition, get ready to make payments. But it's not necessary for you to do so. But if you are trying to be very aggressive with your loans and you want to start making payments immediately, there's nothing would be stopping you from making a payment during your grace period. Okay, so going through the options. So when you start residency, you have two main options. And so the first thing you need to decide is if you want to go into repayment immediately or if you want to go into forbearance. So I'm going to start with the forbearance option first. If you decide to not make payments on your loans, and you do have that option as a medical resident, you can basically request a forbearance, which is offered to you strictly because you are a medical resident. This also applies to fellowship. So because you're in that training period, you have the ability to just say, I'm not going to make payments right now. Well, if you choose this option, just know that your interest is still accruing during this time. You do have to request this option with your loan servicing company. They'll set it up for 12 months. So if you, at the end of that 12 months, want to renew that, you do have to request that again. But you can change your mind if you're halfway through and decide, I'd rather be in repayment. You can switch to repayment with no penalty. On the flip side then, if you decide to go into repayment, right as you end your grace period is ending and you're working now and you have an income coming in, you will have a calculated minimum monthly payment that will be due. So you want to make sure that you make that on time. Again, your interest is still accruing on your loans if you're in repayment. You do have to choose a payment plan before the end of your grace period. So again, that would be, if your first payment's due in December, your grace period likely is ending in November. So in the fall sometime, probably August, September, October timeframe. And I mentioned this already, you do recertify the income every 12 months. And again, if you choose to go into repayment and then you decide for whatever reason you aren't able to make those payments, or you just need to focus on something else, then you can switch to a forbearance option if you chose to do that. So those are the main, the main decision you need to make, kind of as you're heading out, is if you do plan to make payments, while you're in residency. So now, and hold on, I just want to pull up the chat. Okay, just checking for questions. Okay, don't see any coming in currently, so I'll keep going. Consolidating versus refinancing. So with the two different terms, I like to just kind of explain to make sure that we're all on the same page, because sometimes these things, when you're talking financial finances you might think mean the same thing, but when we talk about consolidating, we're talking about consolidating all of your individual federal student loans into a direct consolidation loan, which is also a federal loan, for the purpose of getting access to the two programs that maybe you didn't have access to. We'll talk about, on the next slide here, some reasons why you might want to consolidate. So basically all it means is you're taking your individual loans, creating a new larger consolidation loan. And as I mentioned, you have different interest rates on each of those loans. So when you consolidate, they do take a weighted average of all of your interest rates to give you one interest rate on this new consolidation loan. So that is something to keep in mind. Some reasons why people might decide to consolidate is if they have multiple loan servicers. Generally, the Department of Education tries to keep borrowers with the same loan servicing company, but sometimes for whatever reason, you may have one servicer for your undergraduate loans and one for your medical school loans. If that's the case and you want to get them to one servicer, so you just have to make that one payment, consolidation is one way to accomplish that. I haven't heard that being such an issue this year, but last year we had several. We were hearing quite a few from borrowers that for whatever reason their loans were split. So consolidation would take care of that. From your perspective, they do try to fix this on the back end. So if you ever do see that you have two loan servicers and all of a sudden they're with one, it's because federal student aid has said that they try to clean these up as they find them, but you do have the option to consolidate if that's the case. If you have loans that aren't currently eligible for an income-driven plan, or public service loan forgiveness is another reason to consolidate into a direct loan. And this would only be other federal loans that don't qualify. So for example, that Perkins loan that I mentioned earlier, if you wanted to consolidate that with your direct loans so that you could apply for an IDR plan or include it in potentially public service loan forgiveness, you can consolidate that loan. And a Perkins loan you will see listed on your studentaid.gov account if you have one of those. So that's one reason. Another, not so relevant to probably this group, but in the past, people with older federal loans that were not the direct loan program, but the program that came before it, the FFEL program, were able to consolidate their loans into a direct loan to basically get access to the IDR plans. So again, just one reason why people might consolidate. And then more commonly for medical school borrowers, sometimes students decide they want to start officially on an income-driven plan prior to that grace period ending. And the only way to do that would be to consolidate your loans, because consolidation loans do not have a grace period. So if you were to consolidate all of your loans, let's say in June, repayment would start in July or August because there is no grace period. So once it's processed, you pick a repayment plan and you're officially on a repayment plan sooner if you consolidate. Again, if you don't consolidate, then you have that 6-month grace period before you can officially enroll into an IDR plan. So that is one reason why some borrowers choose to do that. We have one question here. If you want to consolidate federal loans after graduation and apply for the IBR plan, do you consolidate before or after you apply for IBR? So thank you for the question. You would need to consolidate first to be able to choose that IBR plan, because otherwise if you try to apply for the income-driven plans, any of those that are available, and you aren't close enough to your grace period ending, it won't let you fill out that application. So it's going to say you're not close enough yet, you need to wait till 90 days out. But if you consolidate, then that loan becomes due immediately, and then you'll have the option to fill out that application. So you would consolidate first. Great question. So switching gears here and talking about refinancing. So this is where we want to make sure we understand the difference between the two terms. So refinancing a loan would be basically applying for a loan at a private bank and then using that money to pay off your federal loans. So you're transferring the federal loan basically to the private loan company, generally maybe because there's a better interest rate or different repayment terms that make it something appealing to you. So generally you do have to apply and have good credit. So you're going to have to show that you have, a credit history, you have a good credit score, and that you also have an income that supports that repayment plan. So if you don't have an income, generally you would, unless you have a co-signer that would be willing to co-sign the loan for you and help you make those payments, you wouldn't be approved necessarily for a refinance loan. So sometimes it's something that you'll think about later on, after residency, after your income goes up and you're looking at options in terms of, at that point in time. But a couple things to think about before you make that decision right now is what type of interest rate you would have and what's being offered. Private loans can have fixed rates, which you'll be told what the rate is. That's the rate, the life of the loan, but they also can have variable rates. So you want to make sure you understand the difference. A variable interest rate can change over time, multiple times over the life of that loan. So it may start off with a really low introductory rate, but then, periodically it goes up, and then maybe it ends up being higher than what your loan rate was originally. So you want to be careful with variable rate loans. If you are interested in working in public service, or you need the income-driven repayment plan because you need your payment to be lower while you're in residency, this would be the biggest reason why you would not want to refinance right now. Because if you take your loans out of the federal system and refinance to a private loan, you cannot put them back in. So you would lose access to any of the income-driven repayment plan options, and then also public service loan forgiveness. So that's kind of the decision you want to think of through before you decide to refinance. And generally, private loan companies don't offer as many repayment flexibility in terms of lowering your monthly payment for a certain amount of time. So just understanding the terms and conditions that come with a private loan if you decide you do want to refinance for whatever reason. The other thing to keep in mind is that federal loans do have death and disability discharges provisions within them. So if you were to pass away, or if you became disabled and weren't able to pay on your loans, you could potentially have those forgiven through a disability discharge. The other benefit too is that the federal loans are always going to be in your name, your responsibility. So if something were to happen to you, they get discharged and no one else would be responsible for those. Sometimes with the private loans, if you have a cosigner, or if you have an estate, that and you were to pass away, the debt may need to be settled, and that money would have to be paid back in one way or another. So it does provide, a little bit more protection for your family and your loved ones to not have to manage if something were to happen there. So just a couple things to consider. Talking through the refinancing. I'm sorry, I'm distracted here. I just want to check the questions real quick. I have one question about consolidating. So consolidating takes the average interest rate of all loans. It seems like it would cost more money on average over time. Not understanding the benefits of this unless you were unable to qualify for IDR plans. So yeah, consolidation generally, it's a weighted average of your interest rates. So if you're interested in knowing what that would look like, generally, let's say if you have undergraduate loans that have a much lower rate than your graduate level loans, and then you were to consolidate everything, your weighted average might be a little bit higher than, all those low interest rate loans you have now have a higher interest rate in this consolidation loan. If you are just interested in what that rate looks like, if you go to studentaid.gov and click on the consolidation application and start the process, on the very first page before you have to submit anything, it's going to tell you exactly what that new interest rate is going to be. So if you're, kind of wanting to see what that looks like. The benefit of consolidating isn't really getting a better interest rate. That's not at all it. It would just be to allow you to start repayment sooner if you decided you wanted to be enrolled in an IDR plan, sooner than December of 2025. And then, or if you had those loans that didn't qualify. So you're right, there's not a huge financial benefit for consolidating in terms of saving money on your interest rate. Another question, do you need to consolidate to do IDR if you don't want to pay before you do not have to consolidate to be on an income-driven plan. Again, it would speed up the timeline to allow you to enter the repayment plan sooner, but you do not have to do that. You just have to wait for your grace period to end. And then once that ends, then you can apply for that IDR. So kind of leading into the next slide here, we'll talk about public service loan forgiveness, and I'll try to explain a little bit as to why some people do decide to consolidate sooner. And it's really going to come down to personal preference. So public service loan forgiveness, if you think you are headed into a down the direction of maybe academic medicine, your residency employer counts towards public service, and you're going to be in training for a while. If you are employed by a full-time by a qualifying employer, is one of the requirements. You're repaying those direct loans that you had received through the federal government, and you're enrolled in one of the qualifying payment plans, which is generally those income-driven plans, and you do that for 10 years, you could have your loans forgiven through public service loan forgiveness. So again, there's a lot of factors that come into play here. So you may start off on that path, that residency counts towards PSLF, but then after residency, you're going to go into private practice or go into, work for a physician group that is not considered nonprofit. So a lot of different things can kind of, it's a long-term plan you have to kind of think through, and you may not have all the answers right now. So consolidation would allow you, because you're starting a repayment in December, generally after a 6-month grace period, but you start your residency in July, if you wanted your payments to start counting towards PSLF, the only way to start at, when you first start working would be to consolidate, so you enter repayment sooner. We're talking a period of just a couple months, and kind of shifting that timeline. If you did not consolidate and you want to pursue PSLF, you don't have to. Your first payment that could count towards PSLF isn't going to be until you're officially in repayment, which would be likely in December. So that's kind of the thought process behind consolidating versus not when it comes to public service loan forgiveness. In previous years, this question would come up with students a lot and say, yeah, you could go through the process and try to get those extra couple months at the beginning. Right now, and we're going to touch on some of the changes that have happened with the different programs. The consolidation application was down for about a month, as well as the IDR application. So there may be a backlog this summer of processing. So I don't know how long it might take for consolidation loan applications to go through. So, the idea of shifting that timeline might not actually gain you that many extra months if it takes a while to get those applications processed. Okay, we had a question came in, but it looks like I just answered it, so great. All right, if you're interested in public service loan forgiveness and you know that that's where you're headed and your employer is going to qualify, you can complete that public service loan forgiveness form. It's called the PSLF form as soon as you start working and you are officially employed by a qualifying employer. You won't be able to fill it out ahead of time. Your employer has to sign off on that form, basically saying, yes, this person is an employee. They started as of this date. We qualify for PSLF based on this condition. And then once you submit that form for the first time and it gets processed, you will have the payment tracking process starts. So again, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but the studentaid.gov/PSLF has a FAQ about the program. There's an employer search, so you can search for your employer to see if they qualify. And then the help tool itself just helps you fill out that form. And basically, again, you fill out a section, your employer then fills out a section, and then you submit that to studentaid.gov for processing. Once that's submitted for the first time, this payment tracker shows up on your account. So basically all this does is, by submitting that form, kind of starts the process to help you see how many payments you've made towards that 120 payments that would qualify. So you can kind of track your progress as you go. You don't have to do it like right away. It doesn't have to be something you do the first week, but best practice would be to do it within the first couple months of starting a job that qualifies. And then every year, once every 12 months, they do recommend that you have your employer sign off on that again, because they'll only certify the payments you've made during that time that's on that form. So they're not going to assume that you're going to keep your job every month after month. You'll be able to see how many qualifying payments you have, but then how many have actually been certified and made towards that 120. So every 12 months or so, you want to submit your PSLF form if you're planning on pursuing PSLF, just to keep things up to date. A question that just come in is, can you simultaneously do an IDR plan and also apply for PSLF if you are unsure if you'll follow through with PSLF after residency? Yes. So the IDR plans, the income-driven plans, you have to be on one of those plans in order to qualify for PSLF. You don't have to be pursuing PSLF in order to be on one of the plans, though. So they are two separate forms. They don't have to be done at the exact same time, but generally sometimes people will do all their paperwork kind of at the same time frame, because you have to recertify once a year your income with the IDR plan, and it's recommended you submit your employment certification or the PSLF form every 12 months. But they are two separate forms, two separate processes that don't have to be done at the same time. But in order to qualify for PSLF, you do have to be on the IDR plan. Okay, we'll answer more questions, as we go, towards the end if things come up about PSLF, but I'll move on for now. The other programs I just want to highlight, there are other repayment assistance programs available at the national level. These are a couple that you'll see on your screen here, like the National Health Service Corps, NIH, have loan repayment assistance programs where they will give you a lump sum of money to go towards your student loans in turn for a commitment of 2 or 3 years of service. Based on maybe working in a specific, location or a specific, hospitals in communities that are, have need. So just wanted to share some other opportunities for you. Obviously, the military has a lot of these, each branch of the military generally has a loan repayment assistance. Again, there'll be that service-based commitment, some time that you have to commit on your end in order to get get that funding. But if you're interested in, this type of service-based work and, in turn from some financial benefits to help you with manage your loan payments, we have a database on our website. It's linked right here, the AAMC.org/first/programs. That will pull up all the national programs, but you can search by state level. So if you are headed to a specific state and you want to see if they have any kind of service-based program that might benefit you and that you qualify for, highly recommend you at least take a look and just see what's out there as options. I think a lot of times we know that these types of programs offer scholarship funding for medical school, but a lot of them also offer loan repayment assistance after the fact. So just wanted to highlight those opportunities for you. Okay, next we'll go through the repayment plans. I'm going to give you a brief background of kind of where we're at right now in terms of all of the court activity and things that you may have been hearing about in the news. So I just wanted to start with a brief background. You may or may not be aware of all of this, but to kind of set the stage for where we're at. The SAVE plan, which is the Saving on a Valuable Education Plan, has been in the news a lot. There's been a lot happening with that. And, as we kind of sort through what your options are, a lot of it has been impacted based on what's happened in the courts with this particular repayment plan. So back in August of 2023, the SAVE plan went into effect. It effectively replaced a different plan called Repay. It was renamed, and then some benefits were added in terms of how the payment was calculated, and then an interest subsidy that basically anytime you made a payment on this plan, if that payment was not covering your interest due for the month, then they were subsidizing or paying the amount of interest for that month. So it was a huge cost savings to a lot of borrowers in that regard. And then the way the payment calculation was written, it provided the lowest monthly payment of all of the income-driven plans. So sounds great, but then there were some pushbacks. There were some challenges in court, and 2 lawsuits were filed last summer, so June of 2024. And ever since then, we've been kind of in this holding pattern of figuring out, waiting to see what's going to happen with this plan. There were several different, timeframes of different things that were happening within the courts. October of 2024, there was a hearing, and then we just didn't really hear anything. There were oral arguments heard that day, and then there was just no decision that was made in that time frame. So a lot of borrowers that graduated last year may have applied for this, and they've just kind of been sitting in this forbearance period where they aren't making payments, and they just are kind of at a standstill. So fast forward to December of 2024, we did get a little bit more information about some other plans that were impacted. So the pay as you earn and the ICR plans, both of those plans were set to go away last July, but then they brought them back in December as options because of what's happening with SAVE. So both of those plans too were offering forgiveness after a set amount of years, after 20 or 25 years. That was also enjoined in the court case, but it wasn't impacting the ability to enter the plans. Those are still currently options. What we do know now, so that was December. February, there was additional court activity. And then in February is when the income-driven repayment plan applications were taken down. And it was because of what was happening with the court activity. They said they had to rewrite the application to follow the court's ruling on what payment plans should be available. So what we found out just a couple weeks ago, March 26th, the applications came back online, which was great. Now you have the ability to apply. The SAVE is no longer listed as an option. So the 3 options that you will see when you go to apply are pay as you earn, IBR, and ICR. I just want to point out IBR, the middle one listed here, is the only plan currently that was created by Congress and is set in law. So, and it actually was not involved in the court case at all whatsoever. So IBR is what we're going to kind of focus on as an option going forward. But just want to mention that pay and ICR are also currently available to apply for. And we'll talk through some of that here in a few minutes. If you're interested in kind of seeing, the most up-to-date information about what's happening with the court case, and any other legal activity that's impacting the availability of these plans, this is the link to do that. If you go to studentaid.gov, you probably already saw that blue banner up there that says, stay up to date. That's the link to do that. So I highly recommend, as you move forward, if you're hearing things, if you're not sure, if you are, sometimes the headlines can be misleading and you read the details and it may not have to do with what you think it does. So this is a good source of information to find out exactly what's happening that's current and up to date in terms of the available options. Okay, I don't see any questions at the moment, so I'm going to keep going. We're going to talk about the repayment, provide you a couple different repayment scenarios so we can kind of put some of this information and more relevant information for you so you can help make a decision. Before we get to that, I just wanted to talk through the importance of updating your contact information with your loan servicing company, but also with studentaid.gov. So studentaid.gov, that's where you went to file your FAFSA. So whatever email address they have on file, your mailing address, you want to make sure that's up to date. Because of all of the court, safe plan issues through the courts, Department of Ed had been providing updates to borrowers that were enrolled in that plan, and that contact information was coming from studentaid.gov. So in order to make sure you're up to date on that type of thing, and then your loan servicer, of course, has where you'll be receiving information about when your payment's due, how to make that payment, and who to make that payment to. So 2 different places you want to update your contact information. We already talked through the timeline for repayment. We're going to explore these income-driven payment plan options here in a minute. And then another thing I just want to mention is when you do set up your account with your loan servicing company and you start to make those payments, if you enroll in auto pay, generally they'll offer you an interest deduction of about 2.25% off of your interest rate. If you set up auto pay, it's also a good idea to do that to make sure you're not missing any payments. And I believe most private student loan companies do that as well. So just another thing, if you have private loans, consider looking into to make sure you are making your payments on time and that you get that interest deduction if you can. Okay, so when we run our scenarios, we use our MedLoan organizer and calculator, as I mentioned earlier. So again, I'll be providing these slides. You'll be able to click on the links and it'll take you right to our page with instructions on how to use the calculator. What the calculator will help you do is show you what your payment amount could be on each of the different plans. So the plan you choose is going to determine what that amount is. There are traditional plans available, which are just plans that are not based on your income. So there are 3 different plans. The standard plan is a 10-year plan. It is the default plan. So if you do not do anything or do not take any action on choosing a different plan, you will be put on the standard 10-year repayment plan, which during residency may, for most people, not be something that they could afford. Then we have the income-driven options. And as I mentioned, these are the 3 that are currently available when you go to apply. We have the IBR, income-based, the pay-as-you-earn, and income contingent. I'm really not going to talk about ICR, the income contingent, only because it's not a very popular plan with medical school borrowers. We do not have it in our calculator. We never have. The amount of your payment is based on 20% of your discretionary income on that plan, and pay-as-you-earn and IBR is only based on 10%. So you're going to get a lower monthly payment on the other 2 plans. ICR is just an older plan in general, so it came out, and then these other 2 came out with better benefits. The 10%, I know it says here 10 to 15% of discretionary income for IBR. That's based on when you borrowed the loan. So if you have older loans that are prior to July 1st of 2014, your payment would be based on 15% of your income, but anything borrowed after July 1st of 2014, that payment would be based on 10% of your discretionary income, which is after taxes. There's a formula that's your adjusted gross income minus 150% of the poverty guideline, and that's what determines that discretionary income. And that's all built into the calculator, our calculator, and also studentaid.gov's calculator to determine what that payment amount might look like. So again, we're going to focus on just a couple of these options that are a little bit more relevant to medical school borrowers. I do have this slide here too, just to kind of compare side by side the differences between the different plans. Just going to go real quickly through IBR and pay so we understand the differences there, because the payment amount on both of those plans is going to be calculated exactly the same way. These plans are very similar because of that. They also both offer a cap on your monthly payment, which means your payment, no matter how much money you make, will never be higher than whatever your standard payment amount would have been if you had entered a standard plan. You do have to qualify to enter into both of these plans, meaning you have a partial financial hardship. And again, that just means that you are, at the time you enter these plans, your payment that's calculated on these plans cannot be higher than your standard amount. If it's calculated higher than your standard amount because your income's high, then you don't have that partial financial hardship, therefore you don't qualify to enter into these plans. The other thing, both of them are eligible for PSLF. The main difference I kind of want to touch on between these two plans is one, we know that I mentioned earlier, the IBR was created by Congress. It is set in law. It's kind of the most stable of all the plans because it wasn't involved in any of that court activity and would require an act of Congress to make any changes to it. Pay as you earn is currently available. It's only available until July 1st of 2027. So they are planning on, again, sunsetting this plan eventually. But new borrowers are able to enroll currently. And then the biggest difference comes down to the interest capitalization. So I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, if you are on IBR and you decide to leave IBR, or you don't recertify your income, or you no longer qualify to be on IBR, then your interest, any unpaid interest you have on your loans will capitalize. So that is one aspect of IBR that's, again, written into the law that will happen. That does not happen if you're on pay and then you were to leave pay. So in some cases, pay can have a slight benefit to you in terms of interest capitalization once you lose that partial financial hardship, but it really, could be it's kind of something long-term that happens once your income goes up and you're no longer on that plan, or remain on that plan. So when I go through the scenarios, we can talk a little bit more on that if to kind of clarify, but it's usually a pretty slight difference. Other than that, the plans are pretty much very much the same. And then for all of these income-driven plans, if you are married and you file taxes jointly, they will take into consideration both of your income and your spouse's income to make that determination or that calculation on your payment. Okay, still no questions, so we're gonna keep moving through. Just first scenario here, we have a resident that is starting a 3-year residency, and with student loan debt of 200,000. Their residency stipend, we're going to use 67,400 because that's the median that's projected for this upcoming 2025, for 2025. And then after residency salary starting at 200,000. So what that's going to look like for a standard monthly payment would be on $200,000 of student loan debt is going to be about $2,600 a month. And that's, again, the standard 10-year repayment. If you choose no other option, that's what your first bill is going to look like. So if that does not seem reasonable for you, which for many of you probably won't be, here's what some options of what you can expect to see if you were to apply for a different plan. So the first row here, we have IBR and pay as you earn kind of combined, again, because that payment is calculated exactly the same. Wanted to show you kind of what that looks like on either plan. So both of those plans are 20-year plans. Your payment during residency, based on that salary of 67,400, your payment, you're looking at about $370 a month. Our calculator does build in projections. You're going to get an increase each year. So that $410 a month would be your year 3 salary has increased at that point. So $410 a month. After residency, based on that $200,000, you're looking at a payment of about $1,600 a month, up to $2,300 a month, over that 20-year time frame. You can see the total paid amount on the loan. So with IBR, and we don't know exactly what's going to happen with pay in this regard because that was part of the court case. But with IBR, it is built into the law that if after year 20 you still have a balance remaining and you've been on this plan the entire time, you've made all the minimum monthly payments that were due, you potentially would have about $67,000 left to pay on that loan after year 20. And if that's the case, that amount could be forgiven through IDR forgiveness. So that's kind of what that looks like long term if you stay on this plan and make those minimum payments for 20 years. To compare that to what PSLF looks like, if you were to successfully work somewhere for 10 years and make 120 payments, you would have paid back about $158,000 over those 10 years, and then $208,000 was forgiven after year 10 that you've made your commitment to public service loan forgiveness in full. So that's the difference between the forgivenesses that are listed here on this page. Another option would be is if you were to go into forbearance. We talked about that at the beginning as well, like not make a payment at all during residency and then enter a standard repayment plan at that point. So you do 3 years of no payments, and then once you start residency, your standard amount would be $3,000 a month because it's determining that amount based on when you enter repayment. So slightly higher than the $2,600 standard payment if you went right after, right into residency and made that standard payment. So anyway, $3,000 a month, you're paying back 362,000. You're paying less on this plan because it's only taking you 10 years to pay it off versus the 20 years in the example above it. And then just to give you another option, if you did not want to do an income-driven option, maybe you have a spouse or somebody else that can help you, or you have other financial means to pay off your loans, but you want to reduce your payment a little bit. An extended option would extend it out over 25 years. Your payment would be about $1,600 a month. Obviously, you're paying more in interest over that time if it takes you the full 25 years. But just wanted to give you another example of what that might look like. Question that came in about if you no longer qualify for the partial financial hardship and therefore can't do IBR, are you still eligible for PSLF? So yes, so if you are in IBR or pay, and then you no longer qualify because your income goes up after residency, and they're saying you no longer qualify to be on that plan, they don't necessarily remove you from the plan itself, but your payment's going to go up to whatever it's calculated to be. So you'll still officially be on the plan, but your payments is going to be higher. So you'll still remain that eligible for PSLF in that regard. The standard monthly plan, if you don't consolidate and you just enter a standard plans actually it does count towards PSLF as well. It's just you can't be on a standard plan for 10 years because you would have paid that loan off within 10 years. So an IBR plan, if you start off on that and then you lose that qualification, you still remain eligible for PSLF, assuming you don't switch to an extended plan or there's another plan called graduated that would not be eligible for PSLF, but you would just remain as is, just making higher payments. That's a great question. Okay, another example for you. This time 3-year residency, slightly higher loan debt at 250,000, same residency stipend, and then the after residency salary a little bit higher as well at 300,000. So again, I won't read this through, line by line like I did last time, but just to give you an idea, $250,000, the standard 10-year payment's $3,300 a month. In this case, the IBR and pay is only going to take 19 years to pay this off if that borrower were to choose to make the minimum payments. So the difference here is because it is a 20-year plan, but based on the higher salary after residency, it won't take them the full 20 years. So there is no forgiveness in this regard in terms of IDR because they're not on the plan for 20 years. Again, you can see PSLF, if they were to follow this plan for 10 years, they're paying back about $214,000 and the remainder of that would be forgiven. In this case, because the debt's higher, your standard monthly payment's going to be higher. So the forbearance option and then entering a standard plan would be, 4 years of residency, no payment, and then 10 years of $4,100 a month, and paying that off in that regard. And then, of course, the extended option, just to give you another example, $2,000 a month for 25 years. So obviously that plan is always going to show you, the total paid on the loans can be much, much higher because you're just paying, taking you 25 years to pay would be the longest plan that you could do. Question that just came in, can you do PSLF if you go into forbearance during residency? That is a great question. You cannot get credit for months that you're in forbearance. So you could do PSLF if you're after residency counted and then you were in repayment, and you don't necessarily have to choose a standard plan, you could still enter into an income-based plan, assuming your income, you time it right where your income hasn't gone up drastically at that point where you wouldn't qualify. But no, the months that you're in forbearance would not count towards PSLF, unfortunately. So you would have to be actively in an IDR plan in order for those months to qualify. Well, let's see. Is there a possibility that pay will be removed prior to July 2027 or even during the middle of the year? I would say there is a possibility, yes. The information that's on student.gov specifically had that date of July 1st, 2027. I'm not sure exactly why it was pushed out that far. I'm sure there's a reason. But because they were already planning on getting rid of the pay-as-you-earn plan back in 2024 and they brought it back, I do think that there could be a potential for that to not be an option in the future prior to 2027. Again, I just going based off of the information that's available as of today, it is an option and that's the date that they have set. But I do think that because pay was not created by Congress and it was created through other executive actions, I do think there's potential that date could change or they could remove it. Generally, though, with pay, because we knew that plan was going away in 2024, anybody that was on pay was going to remain on pay. So basically, they were grandfathering. If you were already on pay, you were going to remain on pay, just wasn't an option for new borrowers. So I would anticipate that that would be the same for borrowers that are entering in from when they brought it back in December to now. So once you're on that plan, if it does go away and is no longer an option, it's going to be no longer an option for people who haven't actually applied for it yet. So if it goes away in the middle of the year and you're on it, I would think they're going to keep you on it and allow you to finish that out because that was the plan prior to all of this happening last summer. Is the IBR monthly payment based on the income at the time, regardless of how much debt you have going into the residency? Yes. Your IBR payment, your pay-as-you-earn payment is going to be based on your current income, or if you had filed taxes, your previous tax year's income. So it's not going to be based on how much debt you owe. It's always going to be based on your income at the time. So that's why these payment plans are flexible, while you're a resident, because no matter how much debt you owe, it's going to be based on that income. So that's where it's going to allow you to be able to at least make payments until your income goes up. It's a great question. Okay, if there continues to be delays with IBR applications, specifically pay, due to things happening in court, will we be placed in forbearance as the application is processed? What interest accrued during that time? Great question. So with the SAVE, everything that's happening with SAVE, so borrowers that were on SAVE, if they applied and were put onto that plan, they have not, they are in a forbearance that interest is not accruing and payments are not required to be made. That's specific to pay. If when you apply for any of the plans, and this is true prior to all of the court case and everything that's been happening there, when you apply for an income-driven plan, if there is a delay in processing in terms of your servicer needs more time to process your application, they have what they call a processing forbearance that they'll put you into, which they can put you in for up to 2 months. Those 2 months, that 60-day time frame, those months do count for PSLF if you're working and you otherwise would have made a payment during those months. And currently interest is accruing during a processing forbearance. The SAVE forbearance is different because of the court case. So and this is all on studentaid.gov. There's some FAQ questions that specifically kind of go through the different forbearance types, when interest accrues, when it doesn't. But the processing forbearances would be PSLF eligible, but interest is still accruing, if I'm recalling that correctly. SAVE, on the other hand, is not PSLF eligible. However, interest was not accruing. Either way, during that forbearance period, payments are not required to be made, but you would get credit for PSLF on a processing forbearance. So hopefully that answers your question. Pay right now, so all of you probably are hearing about delays in processing and things like that. They just brought these applications back up, like I said, March 26th. So we do anticipate that there will be delays in processing just due to a backlog, but that they are moving forward and, they will catch up, and get things processed hopefully in a more timely manner. I will say that the IDR application going down did happen last year as well, for other reasons. And once they were able to get it back up and running, they eventually, were able to confidently say they were processing everything as they were coming in. But I would expect, a slight delay as we kind of get moving. But by the time you guys apply, if you're using your grace period and you're not applying until the fall for these payment plans, I'm hoping that we're in a much, clearer process of how quickly things are moving through the process. But if you're interested in pay, you have the ability to apply for it. And, you may be put into a processing forbearance, but that wouldn't be until you were entering repayment, closer to your repayment, your first payment due. I have one more scenario here, just a slightly different scenario with a longer residency. So we have a 5-year residency, higher student loan debt of $300,000. Again, that same residency stipend, and then a higher salary of $400,000 after the fact. So here again, you can see the standard payment's gonna be about $4,000 a month. That payment during residency isn't changing. We're still, because we're using that same residency salary of $67,400, you're gonna be starting off about $370 a month. It's the after residency payment, depending on how your income goes. This is an example of how there's a payment cap on both IBR and pay. So after residency, regardless of how high this person's income gets, the payment's never going to be more than that $4,000 a month, because that's what the standard payment would have been if they entered that plan during repayment. In this scenario, this person's also paying it off in 19 years, so there's no forgiveness. in terms of the 20-year IDR forgiveness. And then PSLF, of course, has, if they're on that track. The amount of PSLF forgiveness is going to vary depending on how long your income is lower. In this case, this person was on a 5-year residency, so their forgiveness amount is going to be higher because they paid less for a longer period of time than the other two examples. Another reason why it's really helpful to put your own numbers in the calculator and figure out what your scenario might look like for yourself. A couple of other things to kind of keep in mind is the scenarios I showed today are just based on single income, not married, no dependents, and that they, just based on that person's income during residency and their projected income after. There are other considerations and calculations you can do with our MLOT calculator, including you can put in there that you're married to another physician, and then it will take into account if that person also has a residency and the difference in their salary. And then also if they're a non-physician, just meaning you put in one salary amount for that person and it projects, an increase over time as well, but not as drastic of a change between residency and attending. You could also add in, change your household size. So if you're having a family or you already do, to see how that impacts your payments. The higher number in your household does drive your payment down a little bit because they do factor in that you have other people to care for. There's an option to make extra payments during after residency in the calculator. So if you do want to be more aggressive with your payments and see what maybe an extra $500 or $1,000 a month looks like on a plan and how quickly that would help you pay it off. And then there is a selection in the calculator, going back up to that third bullet point under the first section. If you plan to, these were the scenarios I showed assume that we were basing it on the residency stipend. If you have filed taxes for this past 2024, your taxes are due today. If you had filed taxes and you didn't make any income or you had a very low income, then there's a potential that your payment for this first year of repayment would be $0 a month or something very low, depending on how much you had made if you filed taxes. So our calculator does have an option to check that because a lot of borrowers tend to file taxes their last year of medical school, and what that would look like if you had no payment actually due that first month. Couple questions that just came in. When is the soonest we're able to apply for an IDR plan? I was told by studentaid.gov it would be within 45 days prior. I was under the impression it was 90 days. So I don't know if that was your exit counseling that said 45 days or if it was on studentaid.gov, but I can verify. I mean, I can revisit that, but 90 days was my understanding. Can you still be on the IBR plan if you pursue fellowship after residency? Yes. So fellowship, again, we know, your length of training might be longer. You can always be on an income-driven plan, assuming that you qualify to be on that plan. It's going to be based on your income. So it doesn't matter, what, if you're resident or fellow, you be qualified for that. These plans are available to everybody, not just, medical student borrowers. They're available to anybody that graduates with federal loan debt. It's just going to be based on your income. So it, irregardless if you're in a fellowship, but generally the longer your training period is, the more beneficial, being able to reduce that payment, during that time when your income might not be as high as it would be after all of your training. Okay, so thank you for this question. In the Med Loan Organizer Calculator, details under IBR, there's a term that states, under current law, any potential IBR or pay forgiveness amount would be a taxable event. Can you explain what the taxable event means? So yes, if we go back to this example here, not that one, this one. So with IBR and pay, if you were on this plan for 20 years and you made your minimum payments and at the end of year 20, you have $67,000 forgiven, that $67,000 that would be forgiven would be taxable to you, meaning you'd have to pay taxes on that amount. That is not the case for PSLF. So if you receive, if you're on IBR or pay and receive forgiveness through PSLF, that's not taxable. But under the current law, any IDR forgiveness after 20 years basically means whatever that amount is, you have to pay taxes on at year 20. So generally, if long-term, if you're on one of these plans and you still, you're a lot of people find ways to be more aggressive, later on once their income goes up, and it may not take them the full 20 years to pay it off, and they're able to avoid this taxable event. But generally, if you're going to have an amount forgiven through IDR forgiveness at year 20, you'd want to work with a tax advisor, tax planner, somebody that can help you anticipate what that bill might be. And then, you might be able to find other ways to reduce your taxable income to kind of offset that, or come up with a plan, because you'd have to likely maybe set up a payment plan or something like that with the IRS to pay that back. But likely what would happen is you'd get a tax form. If that amount was forgiven, they would send you a tax form showing this is the amount that was forgiven. You have to pay taxes on this now because that's considered income to you that you didn't have to pay it back. So that's what they mean by the current law states that on the IRBR plan. Great question. Go through here. Let's see how does being married affect your income-driven payments? If our partner is making more than our resident salary, does it mean our required payment would be more if we were not married? So it has to do with your tax status. So if you are married, legally married, and filing taxes as with this tax status of married filing jointly, then your spouse's income would be included in your payment. If you're not married, you would not be filing taxes together. You aren't able to do that. So it would just be based on your income alone. If you are married, you can get married and then file your taxes separately. That is a tax status you can choose. And currently they are not considering, if you're married filing separately, your spouse's income. So that is one option, but you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons of doing so because there may be tax benefits to filing your taxes jointly versus married filing separately. I can't tell you what those are because it really depends on your financial situation and if that would be something, beneficial for you or not. But generally that's the kind of the decision, like, do we file taxes separately so I can get a lower monthly payment on my student loans? Or do we file taxes jointly and take advantage of whatever tax benefits are to do that? So that'll be, something you'd want to work with a tax professional to determine if you aren't able to figure it out on your own. Great question. Can you go over how to apply for the payment plan based on salary? So it'll be an application. So it's called the income driven repayment plan application. It's a form, it's electronic application. So when you once, just kind of give you a general timeline, I would expect, if you're graduating in May, your grace period would end in November. So probably end of August, early September, you'll start getting information from your loan servicing company stating this is, what your monthly payment's going to be on the standard plan. If you are unable to make this payment, here's the process to apply. So you would fill out the income-driven repayment plan application. It's all done through studentaid.gov. You answer the questions based on your current income. If you had filed taxes for 2024, it's going to ask you, do you have a current tax return on file? You say yes, they're going to use that tax information to determine your payment amount. If you say no, I didn't file taxes because I didn't have an income, then it's going to say, the next question is, are you currently working? Or do you have taxable wages? You'd say yes, because at that point you'd be receiving a paycheck. And then they'll ask you for documentation of your current income, and they'll make the calculation based on what you're currently earning. So likely your paycheck stubs is what I would think that would need to be submitted. And then when you defer loan payment, does it accrue interest? Yes, if you put your loans in forbearance, if you decide to go that route where you're not going to make payments during residency, it is still accruing interest during that time. Okay, I'll circle back to the other question that's in here. I'm going to quickly go through the next couple slides just to kind of wrap up, and then we'll touch base on additional questions. So budgeting in your loan payment. So now that we know, like, a residency stipend amount of $67,400 is going to give you a payment of about $370, say $400 a month. Your take-home pay based on that amount could look like about $4,400 a month once your taxes are taken out of it. Obviously, there's other things that can come out of your paycheck that may fluctuate, what this amount looks like. If you're, putting money towards a retirement plan that your employer offers, if you have to pay for health insurance, all those types of things are going to differ from employer to employer. But this is just to give you a rough estimate of what, first-year resident could be bringing home as a monthly take-home pay, about $4,400. So if we look at that in terms of a budget, your rent and your mortgage, your housing is always going to be probably your highest expense. And then obviously you have your groceries, if you have transportation or car payments or maintenance on a vehicle, building in that student loan payment of that $370, it does fit into a budget here. If again, just an example, it's going to differ for everybody. We do have data that shows that about 70% of residents, so the majority of people, are planning on making payments. I would assume the additional 30% are opting for that forbearance option. But for a lot of people, they are managing making a payment during residency. And then it's important just to, whatever system works for you in terms of making your monthly budget, whether that's using a spreadsheet or just writing things out, using a budgeting app, anything that you can you're going to go back to and follow up on and continue to, monitor every month, once a month, every couple of weeks, something like that. Obviously you've been managing your money all the way through medical school. Right now would be a good time to kind of sit down and go through that budget once you know where you're going to be living, how your expenses are going to change, and just kind of plan for those monthly expenses so what's going where and how much you may have coming in. And then also knowing that whatever decision you make right now, between now and when repayment starts, you can only make based on the information you have. So there's gonna be a lot of changes in your life. Your income's gonna change, your marital status may change, your priorities in terms of what you want to focus on when it comes to your finances will change. I always say it's a good idea to kind of reevaluate things, periodically, but definitely after residency and you know a little bit more what your future looks like in terms of your employment. And then if the payment plan you're on still makes sense, great, you continue on. If it doesn't and you need to, pivot at that point, or you want to be more aggressive and get out of debt sooner and just start, making higher payments, you can always make more than the minimum that's due. So all of this entire time we talked about, how they're calculated and just the minimum that's required, but there's no prepayment penalties. You're always able to make more payments on your loans to pay it off quicker if you're able to do that. So just wanted to point that out. And then some additional resources for you. We have on our website a lot of information geared specifically toward medical students. You'll find the link to the Medline Organizer and Calculator. I do have to let you all know that it is going to be down today for maintenance for about a half an hour at 4:30, of course. So between 4:30 and 5 is what I was told. So I apologize that it really lined up right with the end of this presentation. But this evening it should be back up and running. They have to run updates and maintenance, and for whatever reason, whatever had to be fixed had to be done this afternoon. So I apologize in advance for that. But the Medline Organizer Calculator you all have access to as medical students. If you have any issues logging in, meaning you can't get in because of your username and password, you can email us, and I'll have my email or our email information at the end here. If you have any issues, we can make sure we get you set up. We do also have a guide to money management and student loans. There's a graduating medical school checklist. A lot of the information we already went over today, but if you are a visual person, kind of want to walk through each step, just some good tips on things to look at and to do before you start your residency program. And then we do also have a financial wellness program that is free, available to all residents and students. And I don't know if your school has used this with you all already. If not, you're welcome to create an account and basic general financial information, budgeting, credit, taxes, insurance, all of that. Any topic you can think of, there's information there, and it's completely free resource for you to use. And then I also wanted to highlight, we have an upcoming webinar, and we do webinars on different topics throughout the year. The last live webinar we have is about choosing insurance as a medical school student and resident. Probably geared more towards residents. It's very popular with the graduating fourth years every year. We do bring in an expert that works in the field to provide this information to you all. Just good general, not a sales pitch type of presentation by any means, but somebody that can, has experience offering different types of insurance and kind of the benefits and things to think through as you're making those decisions. So that's May 6th. And then again, our contact information here. So if you have any questions about the calculator or anything that we went over today, first@aamc.org is the email address. Myself and my colleague Jonathan are able to answer questions, specifically from you guys if something comes up. I know Stephanie said earlier, take advantage of reaching out to her office. And if you don't mind, if you can scan the QR code that's here to provide some feedback on the session from today. I do share the feedback with your school. It's completely anonymous, just a couple of quick questions. We want to make sure that you're getting, value out of this presentation. And if there's more of something you want or less of something, we can adjust as we go and talk with other students. So appreciate any feedback you're willing to provide. Stephanie, do you want me to address the PSLF question, or do you want to say a few words? I know we have at least one question in there about.
Yeah, if you want to finish up the PSLF question. Okay.
So one question is, any concern about hospitals remaining eligible for PSLF given the recent executive order? So there is a lot happening in terms of the executive orders, but also the budget reconciliation, but a lot of different things happening that could impact PSLF medical school borrowers in a lot of different ways. So what I believe this person is getting at is the hospitals remaining eligible for PSLF. So there is language that we've seen. I don't think anything official yet in the budget reconciliation bill that would, because they're still working through that process, potentially take away nonprofit status from hospitals. And if that were to happen, then yes, your employer would potentially not qualify for PSLF. So that would be an impact to, this community of borrowers that, would have thought they were going into a qualifying organization that qualifies. So that is something we're watching. Nothing official, because again, that's in the budget reconciliation bill, from my understanding. So that would have to be approved by the House and the Senate, and that's where they're looking at finding ways for cost savings to fund other programs. So it's always a give and take, and there's a very long list of things that they start off with wanting to include in that bill or that process, and then that don't ever actually make it through the whole thing. So that's yet to be seen. I mean, I would assume that there's going to be some strong support for hospitals to remain with that nonprofit status. This has nothing to do with PSLF, but for other reasons why hospitals would want to have their nonprofit status stay in place. The executive order, on the other hand, there was an executive order, I believe, early March that specifically talked about PSLF eligible organizations and potentially losing that status if they were supporting illegal immigrants or gender affirming care, I believe, is the other piece of it that kind of gets people talking, because hospitals could be providing those services. So that's another thing. Again, it's executive order, I think, and I have to be honest here, I don't know if there's been legal challenges to that one officially or specifically yet, but I think the bigger threat would be the budget reconciliation bill if that's something were pushed through that way in terms of the hospitals losing nonprofit status, because I think the executive orders are all being challenged in court, and so it'd be a harder push to make changes there. But that there's not enough in that executive order for us to know how those organizations would be identified and who would fall under that. So I'm not saying it's not a concern, but I think the budget reconciliation bill is something we're paying a little bit more closer attention to in terms of the impacts, not just that piece of it. There's other impacts to higher education in general, and funding for graduate students. So we're the AAMC and several other organizations do have government relations teams that work closely with people in Washington that advocate for things that are beneficial to the communities that we serve. And I think it's just one of those things that we have to. We're watching. We're definitely watching and seeing what, if anything, that we can advocate for that would be a benefit, to the majority of the borrowers that we work with. So that's kind of my take on that. Currently, it's just a lot of unknowns. It's just kind of a wait and see, unfortunately, type of situation where we'll have to, just continue to watch the news and try to read through everything that's happening. But I know it's hard because there's a lot of headlines, and sometimes you'll read a headline and then you read the article and it's like, okay, well, they're talking about this, but it's not actually PSLF, it's something else. And there's a lot involved there. So I don't know, Stephanie, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, we're in the same boat. We're watching everything closely and, gaining any insight. But the executive order didn't provide any clarity
Right.
regarding what essentially was going to be affected or being reviewed. So I agree with definitely what you said about the other bill being more of a concern.
Yeah. Okay. It looks like there was another question in here about payment plan, so I'll go back to that one too. If we're on an IBR plan, does our payment go towards interest first? If so, can we make additional payments towards principal, or will it still go to any remaining interest? Thank you so much for asking this question, because I sometimes don't mention this, and it's definitely something that comes up a lot. So the way the federal loan repayments work is if you have outstanding interest on your loans, your payments are always going to go to the interest first, unfortunately. So when you're on it, if your payment's not enough to cover the full amount of interest that month, then it's all going towards interest first. The only way you can pinpoint and start paying down the principal on your loans is if you have paid off all of the interest on all of your loans before you can pinpoint a payment to go directly towards principal. So I know sometimes, if you have other types of loans, like private loans, for example, they're all individual loans. So you're able to, pay off the interest and then pick whatever, and make your principal payments on that specific loan. But with the federal loans, you do have to pay off the interest on all of your loans before you can make a principal payment. Now, with that being said, you can make your minimum monthly payment if you're on IBR. That's gonna, be split out evenly amongst your different loans. And then you want to make a second payment, you can still do that, but it's still gonna go towards the principal, or sorry, the interest first before it hits the principal. So that's a great question. I think I got through all the ones in the chat. I was kind of watching both the chat and the Q&A. Yeah, great questions, everybody. I know it's a lot to take in, so sometimes you have to kind of let it sit with you and digest a little bit, and take advantage of, if your school is offering follow-up sessions with you, or is willing to, kind of walk through your information with you directly. It's always good to talk with your financial aid office. They'll be able to give you your financial services to give you some guide, from a school's perspective, the timeline and things as well. I think we covered all of those.
Anyone have any last minute questions before we wrap up?
And again, you're welcome to email us if something comes up, even if it's, a couple months from now, if you don't want anyone to feel like they're stuck and they don't know what to do. So, feel free to, we always kind of get an influx of questions in November when grace periods are ending, and, for those people who haven't made a decision yet. So we're happy to, answer. We don't have the ability to meet with you all one-on-one, but we're happy to answer questions via email as we can. So. Will the slides be available? I will be emailing the slides to Stephanie this evening. So Stephanie, if you're able to share those out, you're welcome to do that. And then just to confirm, you can't direct your servicer to specifically have your payment go towards your principal, not until the interest is paid off. Again, I haven't gone through the exit counseling in a while, so I don't know. Maybe I should reevaluate what's because there's two things now, this question and then also the 45-day versus 90-day, time frame of when you can apply for the IDR. I'm thinking that's in the exit counseling possibly. And I don't know the way it's worded, if they're saying you can specifically have your payment go to a specific loan, but it won't hit the principal until the interest is paid off, from my understanding. But Stephanie, I'll follow up on that just to make sure that's accurate, and then let you know if I find out that's different. But thank you all for the questions. These are great. It's so helpful to hear from you all, and the questions that you have. Obviously helps us prepare for other presentations, but we always want to make sure that the information we have is up to date and accurate. And there's a lot on studentaid.gov itself that has changed, and certain pages are up to date and other pages aren't. So sometimes it's hard to kind of navigate, what you're reading there. Hopefully once we get through all of the information, because I know right now SAVE is probably in your exit counseling. It's on this loan simulator calculator. It's still in our MLOT calculator currently as well, and that will be removed once there's like official word that it's not an option. But the recent changes of it not being on the IDR application, I think is pretty telling that it's not going to be available, at all going forward. But on studentaid.gov, you're still going to see SAVE, referenced in many areas. But just know that things are in kind of a transition phase currently. So, all right. Well, I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes if we have anything, but otherwise, I think we're set.
Thank you so much, Anne. Appreciate all your help. I'll send the slides out, and we'll be posting the recorded presentation on the website, I believe until June 30th. So feel free to contact our office if you have any questions. I'm going to drop our contact information in the chat. We're happy to meet with you in person or virtually with any questions that you guys have. But I'll be sending everything out very soon. Thank you so much. Appreciate all your presentation, and thanks for coming, and best of luck to everyone on their graduation.
Yes, absolutely. Congratulations and good luck. We all wish you nothing but the best. So good luck. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.